bring in Robin Xing. He's Chief China Economist at Morgan Stanley. And Robin, maybe we can just start with Dave's question there. Okay, yes, it's coming from your peer, Goldman Sachs, but will China's stimulus be enough? And what are you hearing about that question, given you're in Beijing right now and meeting people?
Yes, this is the week you have to be in Beijing with the Politburo meeting, CWC, and the news about yuan devaluation. The short answer is no. I don't think the round 2 stimulus from the Central Economic Work Conference will be enough to reflate the Chinese economy. No. We think 2024 was the year of understanding, the beginning of reflation in China, but it's going to be a long, long battle. It's going to take several years because 2024 is just understanding deflation is a bad thing. They made the pivot since September. However, if you are in Beijing talking with people, there are so many views still in this old school supply-centric mentality. That is, China need to spend money or government deficit on investment rather than consumption or social safety net. That means 2025, the year of trying. They will try a lot of things. It's not enough and keep trying. Maybe by the year of 2026, finally, they will find the right dose of policy, a combination of consumption-centric stimulus plus social safety reform. But it's going to take several years for them to reflate.
What's the best case this time next year, Robin?
Well, I would say with the feedback from social dynamics, jobs, labor market, people's expectation on income, it deepened policymakers' understanding of the reflation problem. And finally, they are saying goodbye to this old school supply-centric understanding and try to introduce a big consumption-centric stimulus package, social safety net reform for migrant workers. It's going to cost them about 10 trillion RMB over 2 years horizon. But it was it because it's no longer creating excess capacity. It's going to boost the demand and it's in line with the long-term rebalancing towards consumption, that kind of journey. So that's the best case. By this time next year, with the feedback from social dynamics, they find the right dose of policy. But the base case is they will keep trying with supply-centric policy, including today's CWC. That's probably not enough to reflate in 6 to 12 months.
Well, speaking of supply side, and I want to ask you what this means for the deleveraging campaign, Robin. Your latest note here talks about how the CEWC will send the strongest stimulus tone yet. There was a change in policy in late September, as you point out. There's a change in the monetary policy stance that we noted this week. Does this effectively mean the deleveraging campaign is effectively over, Robin?
Yes, I do agree this tone in Politburo meeting, in today's CWC, which you will see a government statement this afternoon. The tone, the language will be quite positive. However, there is no details about the size of the package, about the mix of the stimulus. Usually they will only release these details by March next year. Frankly speaking, I think the package will still be modest. Augmented fiscal deficit will likely rise by 2 trillion RMB. That's only less than 1.5% of GDP. And the mix of it will be still largely supply-centric on infrastructure, on industrial capacity, maybe with a little bit more consumer goods trade-in program covering things like phones, but it's not enough. And back to what you asked, I do believe the deficit expansion and the slightly bigger cash for clunkers for consumers, that's the positive part. But overall, the size and the mix is still not enough to decisively reflate the economy.
What is enough then to decisively reflate the economy? What's it actually going to take?
Well, I think when I was in your Hong Kong studio 2 months ago, right after the Politburo meeting pivot in September, we talked about, yes, they made the pivot, they are trying, but because of the old school thinkings, it is still not the whatever it takes moment. And even fast forward to today, with this super strong language from Policy Bureau meeting, it is still not whatever it takes moment. What would be that moment? I would say the completely shift from investment-centric to social welfare reform for migrant workers, for the lower income population, offering the benefits like schools, hospitals, and public housing. It will cost them 7 to 10 trillion for the benefits itself, plus some programs to reduce the housing inventory. So that's a $1.5 trillion US program. That's the whatever it takes moment.
Robin, do you think, and you mentioned social measures earlier on. I want to ask you, I'm not sure if this is an economics question, it's perhaps something more along the lines of sociology, but do you think among policymakers there is an understanding that consumer spending habits of this generation have changed, do you think? And, that takes us all to, and sorry, it's a long-winded question. One of the things that you flagged as well is, while the policy stance is as clear as it can get to support the economy, there is still some risk in the implementation. And I'm wondering where along that line, the transmission line, do we need to keep an eye on whether or not this becomes successful or not, Robin?
Yes, the consumer behavior has changed for two reasons. One is due to the lack of social benefits. Migrant workers and the lower income population save a lot. This is a precautionary saving. Migrant workers on average save 45% of their income. This is the part they can address it with reforms by providing social benefits to migrant workers to unleash this huge consumption potential. The other problem is the housing downfall. With the negative wealth effect from the declining housing price, people don't want to spend as much as before. That's why the central government also needs to step in, using its own balance sheet to help to reduce this very painful adjustment of the housing market by, say, purchasing these unsold units from developers, reducing the inventory overhang. So for both the social welfare reform and helping developers to reduce the housing inventory, central government can play a role. And if they made that step sometime next year, I would be much more positive on the path of reflation.
Robin, just quickly, you've been mentioning about this shift to whatever it takes or takes mindset. What would actually cause that shift, and could it be something that happens under President Trump next year?
Well, I think that's a good question. Some of your competitors ran the story of the yuan devaluation. I don't believe it. I think China will focus on domestic demand rather than use decisive, sizable devaluation, because it's not worth it. Maybe it could help the exporters a little bit, but it may trigger self-fulfilling capital outflow. That pressure, PBOC knew it. They won't do that sizable devaluation. And by the way, exporters are much better positioned than 6 years ago, the first tariff war back in 2018, because Chinese exporters diversified. Now, U.S. is a smaller market for exporters in China. They are more in emerging markets, and they upgraded from just assembling phones to export robotics and cars. So I don't think they need that sizable devaluation to compensate for tariff. Instead, they need to focus on domestic reflation, how to get consumers to spend again with job creation, with better social safety net, and with the government help to stabilize the housing market. So yes, potentially with the tariff from US, with the job pressure, with the feedback from our social dynamic tracker, maybe policymakers' understanding on deflation will deepen again next year. And that could trigger this right dose of policy, the combination of reform and the consumption-centric stimulus.
Robin, I'll try to get some numbers out of you. I need to focus on the change in policy stance, moderately loosen monetary policy. Markets trying to figure out how low can government bond yields get, number one. And number two, China's traditionally aligned money supply growth with GDP growth. Do you think that changes as well?
Well, I do think the monetary policy tone change is more for forward guidance rather than a complete change of policy trajectory, because China has been cutting rates, injecting liquidity, right. So it has been doing the monetary easing anyway. However, the key here is fiscal policy. Can they widen government deficit? I would say a 4% official budget deficit will be a positive surprise. And with the tone from Politburo meeting 3 days ago, it's very likely they can widen the budget deficit to 4%, the first time ever. Even in the first year of COVID, China only set 3.7% official budget deficit. So 4% is definitely a step forward to try to say goodbye to these old school thinkings. And of course, that's just a small portion of augmented deficit. They have items below the lines, local construction bond, special central treasury. Put them together, I'm talking about 2 trillion RMB expansion of augmented deficit. And I think that part will be more useful than just monetary policy.
Robin, thank you so much. It's a great day to be in Beijing, as you point out. Chief China economist at Morgan Stanley from our Beijing studios today.